The Fox X-Men universe was certainly an interesting roller coaster ride for as long as it lasted. I would argue that this universe simultaneously holds some of the best and worst comic book movies ever made. You have classics like Logan, X2, X-Men United, and X-Men First Class, and then you have absolute stinkers like The Last Stand and The New Mutants. And I think a lot of people would argue that X-Men Origins Wolverine is right up there as the most disappointing film in the saga. I mean, it had all the potential in the world to be an awesome, violent retelling of the Weapon X storyline, and even though we all know by now just how bad this movie ultimately was, I actually think that the opening scene of the film captured a bit of the untapped potential we had here, and unironically is one of my favorite opening sequences of all time. The first thing that this opening montage absolutely perfected was its transitions. And to set the stage, we essentially get a montage of Logan and his brother fighting in almost every major US war throughout history. So naturally you'd think transitioning out of one war and into another would be the hardest aspect of making a sequence like this. But the transitions here are so well done. At one point we get a shot of Logan running towards a cannon in the Revolutionary War, and as he's being shot by this cannonball, Logan goes flying, and here is where we see our transition into World War I. And I mean, just look at this transition. It is so smooth. And the transition from World War I into the Second World War is equally smooth. Here we zoom in on Logan's eyes, and just as the camera reaches the end of its zoom, we're now about to witness them storming a beach in Normandy. Making a montage can be a daunting task since you're essentially aiming to condense a lot of time into a small amount of screen time, but what is being done with this sequence is essentially that idea taken to an extreme, because we're quite literally covering over 100 years in the span of just a few minutes. And these transitions were so vital because it made sure that none of the jumps in time were jarring, and it created perfect pacing. And given that so much time was covered here, that's quite impressive in my opinion. I also love the editing used in this montage, in particular the sort of frame freeze effect that we have throughout it. This effect really gives the sequence a historical feel, because every time we get one of these moments, it looks like what we've paused on could be an image straight out of a history book. And I think this really helps set the time period for each segment of the montage. But also I believe this editing technique is being used to show how funky time flows for these two. Since they have such a great healing factor and it's almost impossible for them to die, they have lived really, really long lives, meaning that time probably feels so different to them. Perhaps 100 years feels like just a flash in the pan to them. And I think this is why we freeze frame so often. It's as if we're capturing a massive part of their life in just one image, because to them it probably felt like it went by in a flash. And I also like that each segment here has its own unique color palette. For the Civil War part of the montage, we get a sort of brownish tint on the footage. In the World War I section, we have very dimly lit footage that has bursts of light here and there from the bombs being dropped and guns being fired. When we transition into World War II, we get a bluish tint to the footage, and for our final war sequence in Vietnam, we have relatively normal color grading and lighting with a bit of a yellowish tint. This to let us know that this is by far the most recent sequence in the montage, and given how visually different some of these sequences are from one another, I think the fact that it all flows together so nicely is super impressive. One detail that I also love here is that we don't see Wolverine's claws until we're almost at the end of the opening sequence. Yet we see Sabretooth swiping at people constantly. And this is really nice work from the director here because it subtly lets us know that Sabretooth is more hot-headed and quick to fight. And we essentially get to see Sabretooth slowly become more and more animalistic throughout the sequence. In the Civil War part of the montage at the very beginning, you can tell Victor genuinely cares about Logan, as he seems legitimately worried as his brother is being shot at, but by the time we're in Vietnam, Victor is just here for the thrill and his love of violence. And we see this as Victor attacks their fellow soldiers and ultimately forces Wolverine to bring out his claws in order to come to his brother's aid. It's as if Logan's brother brings the beast out of him. Now, like I said before, the rest of this film is garbanzo beans, straight trash, and I will never forgive them for how badly they did our boy Deadpool, but that being said, this opening was fucking awesome. Honestly, if we're keeping it a buck, this opening montage could have been the entire film. I mean, a movie about Sabretooth and Wolverine fighting in a bunch of wars and slowly drifting apart as brothers? Yeah, that sounds pretty dope to me. Well, if you made it this far, please let me know in the comments what's your favorite X-Men movie, and what are your thoughts on Origins Wolverine? I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please feel free to drop a like and subscribe for more Screen Stories content. Until next time, peace.